Egypt is a part of the world where borders have drastically changed over the centuries. And whilst the rise and fall of regional powers is nothing special, Egypt is a nation which in the mid-19th century had all of these lands taken away from it at the height of its power by a coalition of great powers. You know the ones, it's always them. Egypt had obtained all of this after rebelling against and then defeating the Ottoman Empire in 2 separate wars. But shortly after this, and without so much as a single loss by the Egyptian army to the Ottoman one, Cairo's gains were returned to Constantinople and everyone just sort of forgot about the whole thing. Which raises the obvious question, why did this happen and why would Egypt accept the loss of all of this land without putting up more of a fight? So, like so many things in the 19th century, in order to understand this one fully, we have to go back to Napoleon. As you'll know, before Napoleon's rise to ruling France, he launched an invasion of the Ottoman Empire's province of Egypt, with the hope of using it as a launchpad for disrupting Britain's trade and contact with India and the rest of its empire. And here, the Ottomans were thoroughly beaten. And it was only due to both the intervention of the British and events back in France forcing Napoleon to sneak off that the French weren't successful. So after the dust had settled, someone needed to take the blame for this catastrophe. And the only people who could were either the Ottoman governor of Egypt, appointed by the Sultan to make sure it stayed in line and paid its taxes, or the Mamluks, the local elite who helped out the Ottomans in return for maintaining some authority and prestige. After some long reflection, it turned out that nobody was at fault. And this soon led to a civil war breaking out in Egypt, during which the Ottomans discovered that they were, in fact, broke. Which meant they couldn't pay their Albanian troops in the region who they had brought in to keep order. They promptly rebelled, removed the Ottoman-appointed governor and replaced him with Tahir Pasha, their leader. To everyone's shock and surprise, Tahir also wasn't able to magic up money from nothing, and so also couldn't pay all of his troops, some of whom promptly offed him, and in his stead rose Muhammad Ali. Ali was able to fend off the demands for pay from the troops because he was extremely well liked by local leaders and Cairo's populace, meaning that getting rid of him wouldn't be so easy. Ali was able to consolidate his hold on power and defeat the numerous attempts by the Ottomans and the Mamluks to oust him. In 1805, Selim III, the Ottoman Sultan, realised that Ali wasn't going anywhere and so gave him the title of Pasha and made him governor. After some more civil war, a failed British intervention against Ali and a massacre of 5, Muhammad Ali was now firmly in control of Egypt. And as an insult to his supposed Ottoman overlords, he took the title of Khedive, which was a much grander title than the one he had been given and one that only the Sultan had the right to hand out. Ali swiftly undertook sweeping reforms of Egypt in its economy. He monopolised all foreign trade, which massively increased tax revenue, and he used this money to build a larger, more modern military. This military was soon put to use when the Ottomans lost control of Mecca and Medina to the Sauds. The Ottoman Sultan asked Ali for help to regain it, which he was able to do, thereby giving him a lot of prestige in the region and again making the Ottoman government look wildly incompetent. In the 1820s, he also expanded Egypt southwards, taking all of this, which gave him access to things to sell, like gold, timber, and of course, people. As you'll probably know, the 19th century was not a happy one for the Ottoman Empire, and when the Greeks revolted in the 1820s and Constantinople was unable to crush the revolt, the Sultan yet again turned to Ali in Egypt for help. This time though, Ali wanted compensation, and it was promised that in return for him crushing the Greek revolt, he would be given Crete, which he gladly accepted, because Crete would make an important naval base and would massively increase Egypt's reach and influence across the Mediterranean. The war in Greece started off well for the Egyptian forces. However, Britain, France and especially Russia wanted to see an independent Greece, and they were also deeply worried about this upstart ruler gaining Crete, which would complicate things in the Mediterranean for them. As such, they intervened and promptly destroyed Egypt's shiny new and very expensive navy, as well as ensuring Greece would break away from the Ottoman Empire, which begrudgingly accepted this new reality in 1830. Upset by this loss, Ali began rebuilding his military and demanded compensation from the Ottomans for his losses. They refused because there was nothing he could do about it, but turns out he could invade, which he did in 1831. The Ottomans had very little ability to resist this invasion, because the overwhelming majority of their military was stationed on the frontiers either in the north or in the Balkans, and up until this point if there were any troubles in the Levant, well, the trusty Egyptians would pick up the slack. As such, Ali's army was quickly able to occupy all of this territory, and when the Egyptians did eventually meet the Ottomans here in Konya, the Ottomans were soundly defeated, and thus there was no one left to resist the Egyptian army. Now Muhammad Ali knew that if he pushed too hard, the great powers would intervene again, and so in 1833 he pushed for peace. In the following treaty, the Ottoman Empire, after being forced to by the European powers that is, acknowledged that Egypt was basically independent, but everyone had to pretend that it wasn't, and that the Ottomans would promise not to remove the new rulers of Egypt. Furthermore, in return for him not advancing any further, it was decided that he would in fact now be given Crete as well as these territories in Arabia, and that the Levant would become Egyptian vassals for as long as Ali lived. He accepted these terms because even though above all else he wanted internationally recognised independence, he knew that his new territories would strengthen his hand, and that his successors would likely be able to resist any Ottoman attempts to take it back. So with all that done, why was it then that the great powers soon changed their minds and forced Egypt to hand its gains back? Shockingly, the Ottomans weren't too happy about these continued humiliations at the hands of their supposed vassals, and so they sought to regain the empire's territories and if they could, get rid of Ali altogether. They did this by asking him to just hand them over. And when that ingenious plan somehow failed, they just invaded. This offensive went extremely poorly for the Ottomans, and yet again the Egyptian army was free to roam the Ottoman heartlands. But it was here that internal divisions became a problem. You see, Ali didn't want to do anything that could get the great powers involved again, but Ibrahim, his son and heir, wanted more. You see, the Ottoman Sultan had just died, being replaced by Abdul-Masih, his young son, and Ibrahim believed that if the Egyptians simply advanced, he would easily be able to overthrow this teenager and make his father the new Sultan. Ali was unsure in how to proceed because the British, the Russians and the Austrians were fiercely opposed to anything that could threaten the Ottoman state, and so they'd issued him an ultimatum demanding that his forces withdraw. If he did so quickly, they'd let him keep this. But if he dillied, or dare I say even dallied, he would lose everything that he'd won. Now you'd think that faced with the overwhelming force of these three powers plus a nasty note from Prussia, Ali would have just agreed immediately, but fun fact, no. Looking back, this wasn't the brightest idea, but Ali's main reason for resisting was that France had largely been supportive of Egypt's new rulers. Partly because they had this wacky idea for a canal or something, and partly because it wanted to increase ties with North Africa, some of which it was in the process of conquering. But the support was mostly because the great powers hadn't consulted them about Egypt, and so they felt left out. At this point, the French government and monarchy was already massively unpopular, and so a wave of nationalist sentiment seemed like a good way to boost support. The French dispatched a fleet to Egypt as a show of solidarity and made it clear that they believed that compensation was needed. Not for Egypt, obviously, this was the 19th century, they'd get nothing. Instead, the French demanded that in return for being left out of the solution to the crisis in the Ottoman Empire, the Austrian-led German Confederation and Prussia should cede all of their territories west of the Rhine to it. Now, this might seem like an insane ask, because it was, and all it did was put everyone on edge. Now, the French knew that they couldn't fight, let alone win, a major war against the other European powers. And so, in order to calm things down, Adolphe Thiers, the French Prime Minister, mobilised the army, fortified Paris, and publicly declared that he was more than willing to fight to the bitter end. This made the rest of the French political class quite nervous, and when the king vetoed his more aggressive diplomatic moves, Thiers resigned. His replacement was quick to back down, ordered the French navy home, and apologised for causing a ruckus. And whilst France was making all of these threats, Ali saw it as an opportunity to give him some wiggle room. And it was this hope that the great powers would look to moderate their demands in order to calm things down with France. They did not. As a result, Ali was forced to yield to these demands, which saw him and Egypt lose all of these lands in Arabia, the Levant and also Crete. But he was allowed to remain as ruler of Egypt because getting rid of him sounded difficult. Egypt was given greater autonomy within the empire and his son's succession was guaranteed, providing that he didn't die first, of course. But given that Ali had risen to rule Egypt on the back of a revolt by his fellow Albanian soldiers, that outcome wasn't all too bad when you think about it. For the European powers, their intervention was a successful one. You see, they didn't back the Sultan out of the kindness of their hearts, but because they knew that if the Ottoman Empire were to collapse, it was anyone's guess as to what the region would look like afterwards, and more importantly, if any of their fellow powers would profit at their expense. Also, by paying lip service to the Ottoman ownership of Egypt whilst at the same time realistically making it independent, European powers now had a means of gaining significant influence in an important part of the Mediterranean, without having to go through Constantinople, which for the French, and later the British, turned out to be extremely profitable. I hope you enjoyed this episode with a special thanks to my patrons, James Bizanet, Sky Chappelle, Katoitska, YN Hockey, Anthony Beckett, Marvin Kassow, Winston Kaywood, Gustav Swan, Captain Psydog, Andy McGeehee, Alex Schwinn, Copper Tone, Robert C. Perkins, Mirza Ahmed, AF Firefly, Spencer Lightfoot, Castle Bravo, Rod D. Martin, Respectable Level of Chaos, Spinning 3 Plates, Arthur Hosey Jr., Yuduan Wang, Shuenin, Kamoon Yoon, The McWhopper, Michael Holbert, The Jim Stannon, Kalitro, The Flying Deutschland, Starry Nights, Bonnie Bounds, Jim Strumberg, Remco Huisman, Betkabot, Lord Beak, and Charles I.